What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Here for another Q&A video. As always, this video is brought to you by NutriBio Supplements, Crystals, Bikinis, and BioLongevity Labs. I'm going to be answering your questions that you guys submitted on Instagram, and I'm going to dive right into it. I got an interesting question where the person asked, why have physiques slash training regressed? And I didn't totally understand what he was getting at. So I sent him a follow-up message, and he basically asked me why do I think that we've seen a regression in physiques? Why do I think that there's been this movement towards the way I'm just using his words, this movement towards like fatigue management and making things easier. And he said, you've worked with many different coaches, you've worked with many clients, you've been a bodybuilder yourself for a long time. So, from my perspective, what do I think on this topic? Which I thought was interesting. I don't totally agree that physiques have regressed. Um, in fact, I think it's silly to say that physiques have regressed. I mean, we're seeing guys now routinely for open bodybuilding, guys that are 260 plus in conditioning that would blow the doors off of most of the guys from the 90s, and at body weights that are just much much heavier. Like I saw something, not to throw anybody under the bus, but and I think he has, at times presented one of the best physiques ever. But Flex Wheeler had a quote recently where he was like, "Oh, like, the 90s were better. We were way more peeled than these guys." And it's like, dude, if we're just using him as an example, like he showed up baby shit soft at like 75% of his shows. Um, you don't really get a look in open bodybuilding unless you have striated glutes. That's just the standard for conditioning is just way different. It's way higher than it ever was then. Um, like Dorian had probably the worst structure or the worst shape of the top guys in that era. And he won because he was so overwhelming in terms of size and in terms of conditioning. And nowadays, if he were to stand in open lineups, his conditioning probably, I didn't see it in person, but his conditioning would still be standout, but it wouldn't blow the doors off people. And then size wise, there would be many guys that are bigger than him at this point. So I think it's silly to say that physiques have regressed. What I do think is, or has led to this general feeling from bodybuilding fans, in large part, is because of the emergence of the other categories, both men's physique and especially classic physique. I think that we now see the talent pool for open bodybuilding being smaller and producing less impressive God-given structures because of the emergence and popularity of classic physique, especially. Like if classic physique had never come along, and even if men's physique had never come along, and everyone just had to compete in open bodybuilding, um, so many of those guys would just be forced to do the necessary in order to compete at the open level, like in terms of size, and they would still be able to bring, that classic shape. And then I mean, when you look back at the 90s, a lot of the guys that people hail as being some of the best, like a Flex Wheeler, are really what we would consider today to be a classic physique. I mean, Flex at his best was like, however tall he is, 5'10" or 5'11" or whatever. And he was like 220 pounds. Like he's classic physique. Um, Sean Ray is from that same era and was a perennial contender. He was like 190 pounds. Um, most of these guys were not enormous the way that every open bodybuilder is today. So, um, that's kind of my take on it. I think training wise, there definitely seems to be, and I don't think this has anything to do with regression or comparing one era to another. I think it has always been. You can see a difference in someone's muscularity and their look on stage by the way that they train and what tools they choose to use within their training. So if you look at people like Dorian Yates or someone modern like James Hollingshead compared to someone like Dexter Jackson or Derek Lunsford, there's a very clear difference in the look. And I think a large part of that is due to the training styles. Um, I don't think being more informed or having more tools to use means that training has regressed. Um, I think the best or most sensible bodybuilders probably use a little bit of everything in terms of the different eras or the different styles. Um, Man, I tried to like force my head through a wall and to train as closely or as similar to Dorian as possible for a long time, and I just didn't really grow quite as much, or and I didn't really look quite as much like a bodybuilder. I ended up with a lot of injuries, and then doing more machines, doing more volume. That's when I started to put on a lot of actual tissue, and it also started to look more shapely and round like a bodybuilder. So, um, I think there's positives that have come from all of the things that we know. I mean, for sure, it gets thrown around and used way too much, but for a real deal bodybuilder, especially someone that's inherently motivated and driven, something like fatigue management during a contest prep is super important. And the fact that now we know to track steps and we have the technology to do that. And, um, I think it has helped a certain demographic of competitive bodybuilder bring a better look because they're not just constantly slamming their foot on the gas. These are the type of guys that are like always willing to push more and get leaner and eat less and do more cardio. For guys like that, there are times that you just need to pull back and it actually brings out a better look in them. So in that regard, I think fatigue management is good. And then again, like even in the off season, like if you're training really hard, setting PRs every session, like pushing your body weight up, at some point you're gonna need to back off from the training. People like to use the term deload. I don't necessarily love that phrase or what I understand it to be. Like I don't like sending people in to do like half-ass workouts. I think that just I think that keeps someone from getting back to being fresh and excited about the gym. It takes them longer for that. So for me, I just like time off. I like days off from the gym. But regardless of how you go about it, that's still like a periodized time to pull back or fatigue management. So I think it has its place. Yeah, and that's all I would really say. I think the big thing in terms of like the final product, in terms of like the top end talent that we're seeing, I think Classic Physique has stolen away a lot of the top end God given talent that we used to get to see in open bodybuilding because those guys had no chance but to pursue open bodybuilding, or no choice, I should say. Um, this guy writes in and says DNP and SLU combined lethal combo. Um, I mean, this is like the same. There's been this argument since all the mitochondrial peptides have come into play. People have argued about using BAM 15 and SLU together, whether it makes sense to use them together, whether they should be cycled or used on different days, because they're basically working against each other. DNP and BAM 15, for example, are mitochondrial uncouplers, and something like SLU promotes mitochondrial biogenesis, like the creation of new mitochondria. So um, I tried this myself. I didn't try DMP and SLU. I tried BAM 15 and SLU, and I hated it. I hated the way that it made me feel. And it just didn't seem like, even before I knew that there was an argument not to do it together, I ordered a product that it had both ingredients in it, and I used it, and I just did not like it. I felt um, overheated. I felt completely like buried in terms of feeling overworked in a spot in my prep that shouldn't be the case. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. For a long time I've said that DNP was like one of the few things I would put on my never list, and recently I've come around to the idea. I've spoken to a few people that have used it successfully. I've come around to the idea of possibly experimenting with it and almost using it as like a kickstart, maybe during the first 2 to 4 weeks of a contest prep when there are no other lipolytics or fat burners in. And it just could be at a very low, it works at a very, very low dose. So that's something I've toyed with. You guys know I'll keep you posted, and I'll be honest if I do end up using it. But if I was going to use it, this is something specifically that I would not do. I would remove the SLU. If I pretty much have used SLU straight for the last like 8 months or something. At that point, if I was going to use the DNP, I would take the SLU out for that time period. How to deal with pain in the hands from HGH. Brother, you must be new here. If you figure that out, you'd let me know, other than getting the surgery. Um, there's a couple things. I have recently, um, because my surgery was pushed back, so I'm trying to manage it on my own right now. What I've done is I've mega dosed ALA. I've taken 1,200 milligrams twice a day for the past couple of weeks. That seems to help. And I also have watched some videos on YouTube and seen some different things from physical therapists and other people in of like a related title in that profession. They've talked about things that you can do other than the surgery to help manage your carpal tunnel. And I don't have it in front of me, but one of them was like one of these grip things where you just squeeze it and do reps with it to like basically improve your grip strength. And the idea is that it would improve or grow the tissue around the carpal tunnel so that the nerve isn't so compressed. I just recently started that, so I can't speak on the returns just yet. Other than that, the obvious ones are would be to completely remove it for a time period and let the side effects completely subside. That's always what I've had to do to get them to actually go away. I've never, another piece of advice that you might get from someone else would be to lower the dose. Anytime that I've reached the point that I've gotten the carpal tunnel side effects, lowering the dose wasn't enough to rid me of the side effects. I would have to remove it completely and then basically start back over and titrate it up slowly. So that's probably what I would do. I would pull it out for a week, 10 days, however long it takes for those side effects in your hands to completely subside. And then when it does completely go away, I would still give it a couple days. And then I would start you know, and go up by 2 IUs every 2 days or something. So 2, 4, 6, and work your way back up to whatever you were doing. This guy Connor asks, can you explain your 4 day split? So I'm going to be doing legs on Monday. I did that today. I'm not like full sending it yet, being that I'm on a cruise and I don't want to like start burning through the volume totals that I'll use to grow. I want to be like sensitive to training. Um, but so I'll be doing like a full leg day on Monday. That exercise sequence is calves, hip thrust, hamstring curl, leg extension, hack squat, pendulum squat, good morning, adductor. So kind of a gauntlet of a leg day, but I have a day off the day before I train legs. So yesterday was a day off, and then tomorrow will be a day off. So legs Monday, rest Tuesday. On Wednesday, I will do arms and delts. So it'll be 4 exercises for arms, an exercise for side delts, an exercise for rear delts. Thursday, I'll take a day off as well. And then Friday, I will do push, chest, shoulders, tries. Saturday, I'll do pull, back, buys, rear delts. And then Sunday, I will take off. So, um, many of the body parts, it's um, basically just once a week, one big day, you go in and hit it and then rest. Um, Delts and arms are something that I'm doubling up on and doing twice a week because they're a priority. Starting a cruise with a diet phase, mainly to reset and give myself a break from such high food. Oh man, I like the guy that wrote this in, but I don't know what I don't know what the question is. I guess maybe just he just wants my take on the idea of starting the cruise with a diet. I'll be honest, I don't necessarily love this. It just depends. It depends on so many different things. Like as a general idea, you kind of want to use a cruise almost as like a recomp and use some of the other tools to improve your body composition without eating much less because like if you just spent and this in general, this type of thinking is why I don't necessarily think about the cruise as like a diet or an aggressive diet. Like if you just did a cycle for 16 weeks and you gained 25 pounds, and then now you cruise for 6 or 8 weeks and you lose 20 pounds, how productive was that cycle? Um, Generally, I kind of like the idea of maybe, if you're sick of food and you cannot like think about touching your food, I would make sure then that I'm not adding any output. I'm leaving my cardio and my steps at whatever my prior baseline is. Um, I would lower the food some, and then this is a good time I like to use, fat burners, lipolytics, whatever you want to call it. I would bring in Clen and I would bring in some SLU. I think you can get pretty aggressive with the doses, and that's kind of what I was talking about in terms of using other tools to kind of drive a recomp effect. So ideally, a cruise like you're going to lower your anabolics. To me, for someone that's like pursuing competitive bodybuilding, I just leave the GH unless they're having GH induced issues, high blood sugar, carpal tunnel, if it's a budget thing, whatever. Um, but lower your anabolics, keep your GH the same, keep your food basically the same, maybe lower it a touch, maybe lower that last meal because that tends to be the one that's like the most difficult to get down. Um, maybe lower your rest day food a touch. Don't change cardio or steps, and then bring in plan and SLU. And after a few weeks, you should start to see that although you lose some of the like pop and peak fullness from a cycle. Um, you're actually pulling some body fat off and kind of getting you back into a spot where you have some more runway to get back into a push and grow after that. Best way to transition to a cruise dose and avoid crashing your E2 when blasting test and EQ. Well, he didn't mention what he was doing, like with aromatase inhibitors. He didn't mention dosages, but a couple ways that you could do it. You could, if you're going down to like a real cruise dose or like a more conservative cruise dose, you could pull the EQ completely out. You could pull whatever aromatase inhibitors that you were using completely out and bring your test down to 200 or 300. Most people, especially if they're doing daily shots, most people can get away with that total without needing an aromatase inhibitor and without crashing their E2. So doing that usually lands you in a pretty normal spot E2 wise. Um, Depending on what you wanted to do with compounds, like if you wanted to keep some of the EQ in during the cruise, and you're doing more of like a competitive bodybuilding type cruise, what you could do is when you lower the two compounds, you lower the test and lower the EQ. I would just make sure that the new dosages are at the same ratio. So, for example, if you were doing 900 tests and 300 EQ on a blast, when you lower it, I would lower it to something that's still 3 to 1. So 300 tests, 100 EQ, for example. Um, and in that case, I would probably still just yank out any of the aromatase inhibitors that you would have. I always feel like I would rather err on the side, other than like in contest prep, I would rather err on the side of high E2 than crashing it. Crashing it, you feel shit right away and it fucks everything up. It fucks your training and recovery up. It fucks your sex drive up. Um, if your E2 is a little high, it might take a couple weeks for that to even like manifest in terms of actual physical symptoms that you notice. And before you get to that point, you'll have weeks that you still feel pretty good beforehand anyway. So it's not like you're immediately just going to feel shit the way that you would if you crashed your E2. Best gyms near the Tampa area. I go to the best gym in the Tampa area. It's a private gym that is capped out for members. So I'm not going to tell you what the name of it is. No, I'm just kidding. Especially if you're just like checking it out on a day pass. Counterculture, it's across the bridge in Pinellas Park. That's, I think, the best gym in the area. If you're coming down like for vacation or something, you're going to want to check out MI40. You're going to want to check out Derek's gym. It's like, I've never seen this word in anything else. And I have a pretty vast vocabulary, but the name of Derek's gym is Champs Asilium or something like that. Um, but I would check all those out. Pack Animal Fitness is over in St. Pete as well. I've heard that's a good gym. Thoughts on unilateral or B stance leg movements? Um, so my experience with this, I don't have a ton of experience doing these myself. I had a stretch of like 6 months after I had a terrible lower back glute injury. Um, and it kind of looked like one of my legs atrophied a bit. And so I had a stretch of like 6 or 8 months or something where I did 2 leg days a week. One of them was like a regular leg day, and then the other one was predominantly all unilateral movements. And this is just, I'm not saying this will be the case for everyone, but for me, I honestly just felt like that all of those unilateral movements were kind of junk volume. I didn't feel like I was getting a ton from them, but I was paying the cost to recover from them from my recovery budget, so to speak. Um, Now, B stance leg movements, I have not personally done them. I've seen a lot of the um, competitive ladies do them, like a B stance RDL, and from what I can see and my understanding of why they're doing it, it makes total sense, and I think they can be great movements. I feel like it's still you're still getting the benefit of doing compound movements because the other foot is at least helping you to brace. My beef with doing unilateral movements, I just kind of felt like the loading on each leg was just so much less than what I was used to doing for both legs. Um, it just didn't feel like the work could be effective. So again, just my own personal experience. I personally don't love it. I mean, I love one unilateral movement for legs that I do love is like a walking lunge. Whether that's with like holding dumbbells, if you put a bar across your back. I've even used like the weighted vest to do them, and I like those. Um, but I guess it depends on how often you're training legs. If you're training legs 2 or 3 times a week, and there's going to be overlap using the same type of movements or machines, and you need some variety, I think that's a good time for it. But like in my case, I'm going in and just doing one leg workout. I wouldn't choose to do a single leg press over a regular leg press, or a single leg extension over a regular leg extension. Opinion on adding fats to chicken and rice meals. Is there any merit, or is more rice better for growth? Um, a lot of context missing here, and lots of context would be needed to make the right call. When is the meal that you're having it? Um, is it a training day? Is it a rest day? Is it before you've trained in the day? Is it after? Are you using GH? Are you enhanced? Um, lot going on. In general, like, are you asking, do fats have merit? Of course, it's like, there's only 3 macros. If you're going to completely ignore one of them, I think that's pretty silly. But in general, for guys that are enhanced, I much prefer and have seen so much better results, both in terms of growing and body composition while doing so, with a lower fat approach and higher carb, higher protein. That's how I like to do it. And I also prefer, within that same approach, if I am going to have added fats in the plan, they are separate from the meals that have carbs. So I'm very rarely mixing large amounts of added fats with a high carb, high protein meal. I'm usually putting added fats in as a pretty large amount of added fats, or pretty close to what I'm going to put in the total day, with just protein as someone's final meal, especially if they train earlier in the day. Importance of logbooking, and can it change or even become detrimental as you advance? Um, so, for some context, this guy that asked is not competitive and has no plans of being competitive. So I think for someone like him, or someone like you, Nick, I think it's totally fine if you don't logbook. Um, I think if you are a competitive bodybuilder and you consider yourself an athlete, a huge part of the sport of bodybuilding, and making sure that you progress year after year after year, are the wins that you get every set, every time that you're in the gym. There's just no other way to guarantee that you are objectively making progress. So, long story short, I think if you're competitive and every year, especially as someone that's advanced and already been doing this for years. Um, you've already exposed yourself to PEDs and large food amounts. Um, you can't just go in and wing it. I mean, that's like if you think about it in any other sport, like if you thought that, someone within their training for their sport or their practice, that they were just going to go in and wing it. Like a football team had no set plays or drills, they were just going to go in and wing it. Um, you think about a pitcher in Major League Baseball, like they were going to, in the off season, they were trying to improve their velocity or their arsenal of pitches. They are certainly not just going to be winging their training. Even, in between starts or in between outings, they go in and they have a bullpen session that they throw on the side. They are absolutely not just winging it. They're going in and they know I'm throwing 15 four seamers, I'm throwing 10 changeups, and I'm throwing 7 curveballs. So I think that translates within bodybuilding to absolutely needing to logbook. I think a lot of times you even see guys that have logbooked most of their career and progressed most of their career, and they get to a point that's really, really impressive, and they get super big. And then at a certain point, they stop logbooking, and then you can directly correlate that from that point forward. A lot of times, we chalk it up as a guy being maxed out or something, but really it's just that they haven't continued to progress their training. So, for Unic, I think it's totally fine. You can get awesome workouts, and I think it's just a matter of effort and training hard, train near mechanical failure, like when you're training with really good form, same tempo throughout, and like an explosive effort on a leg extension from the bottom, like you give it everything you have, and the machine just slows down and doesn't really want to move. If you do that, you're going to be fine. You're going to be able to look exactly how you want to look. Um, but I think if you want to like continue to progress and add percentages to an already advanced physique, it's really the only, like, if you are just winging your training or not logbooking it or chasing the pump, and you have decent genetics, you take some drugs, and you eat a lot of food, you're consistent, that will get you to a level of having a pretty impressive physique. You should be able to look pretty good doing that. Um, but at a certain point, it's only going to get you so far. And the way that I think about it is like training is the start of everything that we want to do. Like if you think about it, like if I want to make my arms bigger, I'm not going to do that and say, all right, I'm going to take more EQ or I'm going to eat more food. That's part of it. But it starts with the idea that, okay, I want to bring my arms up. So I'm going to prioritize this within my training split, or I may do more volume, or I may do higher frequency with my arm. It's all a training modulation. So training is number one, I think. And I think that I think it starts and ends with logbooking. Things that you would change about training, PEDs, nutrition, etc., if you could start it all over. Whew, man, heavy hitter question. Yeah, I would do so much. I would do it all very, very differently. I honestly would have taken more drugs earlier on. I would have experimented and pushed higher volume totals training wise and trained more, again, progressively. Like I track every set. So even if I'm doing high volume or I'm doing 5 sets per exercise, every single one of them is tracked. If I'm doing curls with a 25-pound dumbbell, I'm going to track sets 1 through 5. I got 18, 16, 15, 14, and 11. Like I'm tracking everything. But within that, I think going back, I would have taken more earlier on. Um, sensibly, like within the cycle designs that I know work for me, and like only within the compounds that I know work for me. I wouldn't go back and take more Tren or fucking DHB or something, but I would go back. I would not have spent so much time doing low test, high DHT. Um, I wouldn't have spent so much time trying to do low volume, very high intensity training, like I talked about earlier, like almost Dorian style. I would have trained more like a bodybuilder, like more like a 90s bodybuilder. Um, Still intense, still tracking everything, but just more and higher sets and, you know, getting crazy pumps and leaving the gym with crazy pumps. Man, it was probably, man, I was years and years into training before I ever got like a crazy back pump or a crazy shoulder pump, just because of the way that I trained. And then nutrition wise, I mean, of course, it's easy to say now, like I would go back and not do some of the Dreamers bulks that I did. I mean, I did them because that was just the way. And I didn't always have guidance, and it wasn't, the internet and everything wasn't the same as it is now. I didn't have much to go off of. So I was kind of just experimenting and, you know, the few sources of information that were out there, that was just the conventional wisdom. Like, if you're trying to get big, you eat a ton of food. You literally eat everything in sight. You never turn down food. You never, you know, you always finish your plate or your Tupperware or whatever. You don't do any cardio in the off season. Like, these were kind of the general rules when I was coming up. Um, but I think besides that, I going back to what I talked about before, I would have more quickly or earlier in my process, I would have gone to the high protein, high carb, like low fat approach, being enhanced. You just don't need much, and composition wise, composition and training wise, you just do so much better on high carb. Morning vacuum ab routine, morning routine in general, fitness related. Oh man, I'd like to make it sound like I'm like, you know, one of these like hyper influencers that has like the perfect morning routine every day, but it's not. I mean, I do the same thing every day. I don't know that I would call it a morning routine. Um, you know, at some point in the middle of the night, I wake up, and at that point I take my thyroid medication. I have that like kind of next to my bed. Um, and then so then whenever I do get up, that allows me, right now I'm abstaining from caffeine. I'm going to go a couple of weeks without caffeine, um, so that when I start my blast, I can take pre-workout and have it really hit. But typically I take my thyroid in the middle of the night. That way, by the time I wake up, it's been hours. I can wake up and have a coffee and take whatever, peptide, morning peptides I might be taking. Um, and then it's one or the other. I either go for my morning walk, which I call my morning cardio because my heart rate's up in the 140s and the 150s. Um, or I do my recently I've done the vacuums before I go out in the morning, and then it feels like I'm more aware of my stomach the whole time that I'm walking. So I'll probably continue that. So I wake up, have my coffee, my peptides, whatever. Um, I do my vacuums, and then I get up, I go do my walk. It's right now, the loop that I've been doing is like 35 minutes. Um, then I come back and have meal one. Nothing super groundbreaking there. If you could only have one as a secondary compound in off season to go along with test and GH, would it be EQ or Nandrolone, and why? Totally up to you. Totally up to you in terms of what you tolerate. Um, for argument's sake, let's say you're someone like me, you have no issues with either. Um, Man, that's a good question. I kind of always just take the two of them together, to be honest. I would say probably EQ because then, depending on how much I'm taking and how much test I'm taking, I can probably get away with no aromatase inhibitor. And if I decide to go, like if I'm only using those two compounds plus the GH, if I decide to go really high test, I can trail with pretty high EQ as well. Whereas I've never, like in my mind, like if I'm going to take 1500 megs of test, I could take 1000 megs of EQ. Whereas if I go that high with test, I haven't gone up that high with Deca or NPP. I've been up to 800. I don't know how I would feel on 1000, especially if that was like the only other compound besides the test. So for me, I would probably go EQ, but you can't go wrong with either. I think especially like I talked about this. We talked about this on an episode a couple weeks ago. I talked about this with a client recently. I am totally convinced that for most guys, you can get as big as you need to in the off season, given that every other aspect is locked in. Um, on high test, high GH, and insulin. You're going to push the food, you're going to push the training, but I think those three alone, you could get pretty damn big. So then, you have one other anabolic to go along with it. I don't think you can go wrong with either, whether it's EQ or Nandrolone. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it. That's where I'm going to leave it for now. So thanks to everybody that follows along. Thanks to everybody that watches. If you are watching and you're not subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. I am creeping up on a personal goal of mine that I set out for myself at the beginning of the year. Austin and I started doing the podcast January 1st, and I had like 106 subs or something like that. And I'm creeping up on 1,000. So if you watch the videos and you aren't yet subscribed, take 5 seconds and subscribe to the channel. I thank you in advance. And otherwise, until next time, guys, I am out.